Farhan Lalji from TSN joining us. Perfect. We were going to talk today anyway, and then all the big news when it comes to the CFL and kind of sporting world in Canada happens in Vancouver today. Rick Campbell let go by the BC Lions. Farhan, first off, was this like old news? Did you know this was coming down a while ago, or is this a surprise to you?
No, it's not a surprise. I think many of us kind of thought this was the direction the organization would head in. But truthfully, like for all the people who thought this decision had been made, like Rick Campbell was in here yesterday still talking personnel with Neil McAvoy and Ryan Rigmaiden, right? And the president and the owner kind of went through a bit of a process, and then yesterday they made this morning they made the decision and informed him. I mean, I think last night they made it, and this morning they informed him, but it wasn't the done deal everyone assumed it was. They did have to go through a process. They wanted to wait until after Grey Cup started. But look, ultimately this team really, really underachieved and disappointed relative to expectations and what was spent on it. So here we are, right? Coaching change after 4 years.
Who would be the front runner there? Is it Buck Pierce?
BC's already asked for permission to speak to Buck Pierce. So that's he'll be one of the guys. And I do think they kind of want to lean offensively, right? So I think that's part of it. I think Jordan McSimic will get a real opportunity here to interview and potentially be the head coach, right? And that's kind of common, right? I mean, I know that Saskatchewan did it differently. They just went through the process and they weren't hung up on what the side of the ball profile was of who they hired, right? And Corey Mace did such a good job in his presentation that he was hard not to get excited about. But I do think here the offensive guys might have a bit of an edge. And I just think there's so many defensive guys available league-wide that I think teams kind of go through this where you fast-track offensive people simply because you want to get that side of the ball taken care of. So, but I do think that Mark Killam will get strong consideration as well. As a special teams guy. I do think Mark Washington, formerly of Hamilton, but a longtime BC Lions player and assistant, I think will get some interest, and there'll be some others. So, they talked today about interviewing 8 to 10 candidates, but as I see it, I think Pierce and McSimic probably become the front runners.
Farhan, this seems like it's got to be more of a big picture move. I mean, when you look at it at the end of the day, they're only 2 wins away from the Grey Cup. If they win and they make the West Final, does this move still happen? Like, how it's got to be part of a bigger picture moving forward.
Well, look, I think it's easy to say it was just 2 games, but it isn't. Like, look, if the Lions went 12-6 again and just looked better all season, but wound up getting upset in an early playoff game, I think the conversation would be different, right? When we got to the final month of the season, I felt that if the Lions lost in the first round and didn't have a home playoff game and went meekly into the night, which ultimately is what happened, that there was going to have to be a decision made and the team's going to have to go through a process. Whereas if the team had just played better during the season, even if they didn't have the playoff success, I don't think you react. So it's easy to look at it and say they were just 2 wins away, but this team was not a contender. They were legitimately not close. Who thought they were going to win the game in Saskatchewan? And had they gone to Winnipeg, who thought they were going to win that game? Just based on their form over a larger sample size this season, I think that's what you look at as opposed to a team that theoretically was 2 wins away, because for all practical purposes, they actually weren't.
Did he have that locker room? Was he liked do you think from the guys that you're around that team a lot?
Like isn't the right word, right? I just think that I do think he lost portions of the locker room based on how he handled the quarterback situation. And I think that's hindsight. You talk to the people here, and everybody here, myself included, felt like at some point Nathan Rourke was going to revert back to 2022 Nathan Rourke, that it was just going to happen, and then we wouldn't be having a quarterback conversation. Whereas last year when it happened and they didn't give Vernon an opportunity, like right away, should they have kept the door open that Vernon was going to get his job back or had a window to get his job back? They probably should have done that. That certainly took Vernon aback, and certain players were taken aback. Now, let's say they had done that, and then Nathan hit it out of the park and played at 2022 levels, and they just kept the job with him. You wouldn't get the pushback. But then they didn't make the commitment to Vernon in 2024 that they did to Nathan in 22. Then he didn't perform to that level. So just kind of the way it was handled, and I say this before, this is purely in hindsight. They handled it wrong purely in hindsight, because you can get why they did some of what they did when those decisions were made.
Over under a week that he's announced the head coach in Edmonton?
It's a good question. They haven't asked for permission yet, but that's only because Rick was informed this morning. I think they will ask for permission, but yeah, probably. I would probably say just over a week. I don't think this process takes that long, but I do think that Mark Killam is going to get serious consideration. I think Jordan McSimic might as well. Jordan probably gets more consideration if they think they might lose him to BC, right? Because I think if you want to keep Trey Ford as your quarterback, you better get the offensive coordinator right. And when you look at what McSimic did to both Rourke in 22 and Vernon Adams in 24, and in 23 as well, I think you got to find a way to get him there. So I do think those two other names will get consideration, but certainly Rick Campbell will rightfully be the heavy betting favorite.
League-wise, what else are you curious about in the short term here when it comes to the league?
Where Vernon Adams winds up in a trade, and I think it's going to be Calgary, but I'm trying to get a sense of what the actual market is. Because, I do think that while certain teams seem solidified at the position, the guy they're locked into, is older. And so there might be a bigger market than you think. I think we'll find that out in the next couple of days. Certainly the one team we know for sure that's going to have an interest in Vernon is Calgary. But I'm curious to see, how committed Edmonton is to Trey Ford, and how committed some of these other teams are to their older veteran quarterbacks.
And what kind of asking price comes with that move?
Well, it depends on the size of the market, right? I mean, if it's only Calgary will probably push back and say, we're not going to give you a first round pick. We'll wait for you to release them. But if there is a legitimate market and all it takes is two, if two teams legitimately want them, then they're going to get a first round draft pick. Now, Edmonton doesn't have a first round draft pick, so it might have to be a different type of compensation. But, I would think that that's probably a reasonable asking price given the fact that BC traded him for a first. They gave up a first to get him back, and he's a significantly better player now than he ever has been. So his value should only be higher, even if teams aren't desperate in the offseason like BC was when they acquired him 3 seasons ago.
What would we have for odds for talking gambling? Maybe plus 1,600 odds that the Riders are interested?
I think the Riders are intrigued more so than interested, right? Like I do think they understand as an organization that they got to look down the road, right? But I think they're really happy with Trevor Harris. I think they're aligned in that. And I think they've already talked about Trevor Harris coming back, I talked to Trevor last week, and it sounds like any family concerns there might be are behind him, and he's got full support of his family to come back. He just wants to make sure his body's in the right place and that the organization knows that he doesn't want to just play one more year. He'd like to play, 2 to 3, and I think he would like to sign a multi-year contract, as proof of that. So I think all those things are part of that. So I think there's a comfort level. Mark Mueller and Trevor get along really, really well, but I know that Mueller also has a lot of respect for VA. So I think, again, intrigued more so than heavily in the market in this moment.
Where do you think Cody Fajardo plays next year?
My gut tells me that he will be potentially a backup quarterback in Edmonton. He or Jake Mayer might wind up there. I don't think they want to let Davis Alexander out of the building in Montreal. No one has told me that Cody's on the block, but Cody at the end of the year himself said that if it might not be the best thing to have 2 elite quarterbacks in the same building, right? So, is there a huge difference between Davis Alexander and Trey Ford? I don't know. But certainly Trey Ford's demonstrated a bit of an injury history that you could go there and maybe you could, find yourself there for a year. Could they both wind up back in Montreal? They could. I think it's unlikely, but I really think it's even more unlikely that Montreal lets Davis Alexander go.
Okay, get the notebook out, Colson. Okay, we've had this debate all week. We're asking you. We're putting Farhan Lalji's name, and then we're going to ask you. We're shifting to the NFL now. Okay, a lot of hard questions today, Farhan. You can say the Kansas City Chiefs, but we went around the horn all week so far. What is the team that beats the Kansas City Chiefs this year in the playoffs?
The Detroit Lions.
In the Super Bowl, then?
Yeah. I like Buffalo's going to do what Buffalo does, and they're not going to beat Kansas City in the playoffs. Now, look, when Kansas City gets to a Super Bowl, I have a difficult time seeing them lose because that's their place, right? Like that's what they do. So, the right answer might be the Kansas City Chiefs, and it depends on what their health and injuries and everything like that look like. But I'm not on Bills Mafia. I think if any team's going to beat them, it's going to be the Detroit Lions.
They get to the Super Bowl, and so they're exact opposite, basically, of the Blue Bombers. But we had around the horn, we've had Pittsburgh, we've had Buffalo. We've had a Philadelphia Eagles. We've had Detroit Lions. Darian said Detroit Lions as well yesterday, right, Darian? And then I said Baltimore. So I don't think they're coming out of the AFC.
Of all those teams, I don't think has a chance. I don't think Philadelphia does. Of all those teams, I think the other teams could, right? I don't want to dismiss them entirely, but Kansas City's got playoff magic. They proved last year they don't have to be at home to win. But right now, things line up for them to be at home. There's a game coming up, I think, December 8th when they play the Chargers. I think is going to be really intriguing. I think that's the only team that has a chance to beat them the rest of the season. So, I really like Kansas City's odds of getting back there. They're only going to get healthier as things progress here.
Yeah.
That team has a greater opportunity to get better by the time we get to late December than anybody else.
Since it's my game, I got two. I put a long shot on Houston as well. Sneaky Houston in the playoffs. Hey, is San Fran for real, or are we writing them off?
Yeah, we're writing them off. They haven't shown us anything. I mean, look, Seattle is not a good football team. Like, they are not good. And for Seattle to go there in San Francisco and beat them with Christian McCaffrey at full health, like their top playmakers aren't making plays right now. And then you got George Kittle kind of in and out with injuries. So a lot's riding on McCaffrey, a lot's riding on Brock Purdy, and their defense isn't playing at an elite level. I know Bosa got hurt, and that kind of allowed Seattle to tread water a little bit when they were in that game. It may have been different if Bosa stays in for the entire 4 quarters. But every week I wait for San Francisco to turn the corner, and every week I'm disappointed.
I'm the same. I'm exactly the same. Okay, last one before I let you go. And this is strictly for gambling purposes for me. This week, who should I put money on to win the college football playoff?
To win the college football playoff, I'm going to say Georgia. Like whoever comes out of the SEC is going to be so battle tested this year. I'm not there on Oregon yet. Now, look, I'm biased. I'll admit that, but I'm not there because I saw so many flaws earlier in the season, and I saw some in that Wisconsin game as well. Ohio State, I still like.
They're the favorite. They're the favorite where I sprinkle.
I know. Look, and I like them. And look, they were the favorite coming into the year, but they're getting injuries along the offensive line. I'm not convinced in them at the quarterback position. So I just think that whoever comes out of the SEC is going to be so battle tested that's going to be the team. And from what I've seen thus far, I like Georgia better than Alabama and Tennessee.
Roll Tide. All right, Farhan, thanks so much. Let's regroup next week, and hopefully it's another day like this with a lot to talk about.
Thanks, pal. Talk to you soon.